Hello, Happy New Year. This is the first program of 2023. The program, The Contreras Report. I am Raul Lowry Contreras, your correspondent. Today we are going to talk trade with Mexico, war around the world during our lifetimes, and the political drama we lived through a few days ago when the media, commentators, Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC wrote off California Congressman Kevin McCarthy's decade-long quest for the job of Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, the number 2 person in line for the presidency. It seems, doesn't it, that history is made every day by Americans, history that is unmatched for people my age. We've witnessed a world war, a police action in Korea, a Cold War with the Soviet Union, and the fall of the Soviet Union. We've seen wars in the Middle East between Jews and Muslims, that is, in fact, a religious war. In the mountains of the Caucasus, 30 years of war has been fought between Christians and Muslims, but that war is not a religious war. During these decades of war, a key ingredient of war is trade, production, and economics, all wrapped up into one package. For example, the miracle of our border with Mexico. Americans on the border with Mexico have seen the border section of America's Sun Belt explode with economic activity that feeds on booms on both sides of the border. Millions of people work in jobs that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago on either side of the border. Trade with Mexico is booming. Almost $2 billion in trade crosses the Mexican border a day, every day, in both directions. $82 million worth every hour of the day. $1.16 million worth every 60 seconds. A minute. That's a minute. Nonetheless, the governments of the United States and Mexico can't get their acts together. These politicians and bureaucrats seem to stumble over fat, clumsy feet and their tongues dragging on the floor. Speaking of wars, Americans just recently watched the battle for the speakership of the House of Representatives, the likes of which hasn't been seen in the U.S. since before the American Civil War. That was in the 1850s. Then it was Democrats that did the fighting, this time Republicans. Then Democrats led the country into a real war in which 600,000 Americans died. Those Democrats were the conservatives of the day. This time, on January 6, 2021, it was conservatives that led the violence that rocked the country in what some call a prelude to another civil war in America. The 1850s conservatives were more than status quo ideologues. They were vicious racists that believed they could actually own human beings that were not allowed to be free, or educated, or practitioners of American economic and political freedom. Why? Pretty good reason in their minds, because those people weren't white. To this day, supporters of that status quo blame their war on aggression from northern industrial states and immigrants that should never have been allowed into the United States. Specifically, Roman Catholic Germans and Roman Catholic Irish. Entire divisions and regiments of the Union Army of President Lincoln, Republican Lincoln, were filled with immigrant Germans and Irish. In New Mexico, the locally recruited Union regiments to fight the Confederacy were filled with men-born Mexican citizens just a few years before. Ditto, the Union regiments raised in Texas, Mexican-born American soldiers. In California, Governor Leland Stanford appointed former Mexican citizen Romualdo Pacheco commanding general of the all-Mexican California Native Cavalry that disarmed Confederate sympathizers in California and Arizona, in what it was then called the Arizona Territory, and sent them scurrying back to Texas, in some cases barefooted, without even horses to ride. They had to walk back to Texas. Then, immigrants were the core of America's Republican Party. Now, not so much. In the fight for Speaker of the House, the fight was between California Congressman Kevin McCarthy and opposition from a gaggle of ultra-conservative Republicans that included, strangely enough, one Mexican-American congressperson, a woman, who had just been elected last November, one black and from Florida, and a fluid group of 18 white, ultra-conservative, anti-immigrant Republicans. This bunch proved to the world that they, generally speaking, are the dumbest, stupidest Republicans the world has ever seen. Since the dumber and more stupid, quote, squad, unquote, led by progressive Democrats, for example, Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez and Jamal Bowman of New York, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota by way of the Sudan, Somalia, Cori Bush of Missouri, and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, a Palestinian, were sworn into Congress. Stupidity, you see, is not exclusive to Republicans or Democrats in Congress. It is no accident that President Joe Biden, a longtime member of Congress, continues to have more people disapprove of his presidency, or that he barely has approval of a handful more Americans than Donald J. Trump had in his 4 years as president. That can be seen in surveys taken since Trump became president, straight through today's surveys that show Biden underwater in public opinion. Back to Congress. And the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, elected Speaker after 15 ballots. The media joined stupid Congresspeople in carrying on about McCarthy's failures, completely ignoring the fact that he had 95% approval of the majority of Republican Congresspeople. For dumb media types, especially at Fox and MSNBC, and to some extent on CNN, McCarthy's party support was almost the same as that of the Democratic leader. But many partisan hacks have carried on and on about how Hakeem Jeffries appeared so smart and brilliant, but he lost. He gave a nice speech, but no matter how brilliant it was, and I put that in quotes, he is still and only the minority leader in Congress for the next 2 years, probably for the next 2 years, unless something momentous happens. But he's not the Speaker. He's the leader of the minority party. McCarthy, on the other hand, is the Speaker, no matter how many votes were taken for him to win it. Will he have problems with those who fought him every inch of the way to his success at 1 o'clock in the morning? Saturday, January 7th? Sure, he will. He wouldn't if he had a larger Republican margin, but he doesn't. Moreover, most, if not all, Republican-approved bills passed by the House will be dead upon arrival in the Senate, which is 51 senators, 49 Republicans, and 60 votes are needed to pass any bill. With their one-vote majority in the Senate, Democrat senators can kill any bill that comes out of the House. So McCarthy has two large obstacles to overcome. The puny opponents from his own party who want to, quote, investigate the FBI, an FBI that America loves, and to go after the president's son, Hunter Biden, because these stupid congressmen believe Hunter is a crook who acted as his father's bagman in getting millions of dirty Ukrainian dollars and dollars from the communist Chinese into the pockets of people named Biden. There might be some political and financial peccadillos that loudmouth Jim Jordan, the new chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and his investigations, will find in his investigations, like those Republicans could not find against Hillary Clinton, but will it matter in the next 2 years? And in the past few days, revelations about some secret classified documents have been found in former Vice President Biden's office and home that should not be anywhere other than in the National Archives. President Biden will now be burdened by an investigation by a newly appointed special prosecutor appointed by Attorney General Garland. As of today, there are now 3 investigations being conducted by 2 special prosecutors, 2 of former President Trump investigations and 1 of President Joe Biden. No time in U.S. history has 2 special prosecutors conducted investigations of presidents that could become criminal prosecutions with charges and trials in federal court. It appears to me that the 2 Department of Justice investigations of former President Donald Trump and 1 of President Biden will dominate the next 2 or 3 or 4 years of our attention. Trump will be charged, I think, for stealing and mishandling top-secret government material from the government. He will also be charged for his deeply rooted Trump responsibility for January 6th insurrection and the fraudulent attempt to prevent Congress the certification of the Biden victory, as well as attempting to criminally demand electoral fraud in Georgia and Wisconsin in an effort to find ghost votes that he claims existed but weren't counted. Now, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the trade with Mexico I started the program with. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the first Contreras Report of 2023, and it fits program planning that the 2022 trade numbers are complete as of December 31st, so we can now intelligently discuss trade with Mexico. That is, of course, legal trade. Trade necessary for both economies, American and Mexican. Illegal trade of drugs into the U.S. and southbound guns and ammunition for the drug cartels depend on the ungodly use of drugs by Americans and the need for weaponry for the massive cartels to dominate their towns and villages in Mexico. The cartels also need weapons to protect extensive drug factories pumping out fentanyl that is killing thousands of dumb Americans looking for the ultimate high. We can only truly discuss legal trade, so here we go. As I said at the beginning, Americans on the border with Mexico have seen the border section of America's Sunbelt explode with economic activity that feeds on booms on both sides of the border. Millions of people work in jobs that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago on both sides of the border. Meanwhile, the Rust Belt, the American Rust Belt, and its pervasive hillbilly elegy life and lifestyle continues its decades of unemployment, population loss, and an America in reverse. Trade with Mexico is booming. Almost $2 billion in trade cross the Mexican border every day of the year in both directions. That is $82 million worth every hour of the day. $1.16 million worth every minute of the 24-hour day. Nonetheless, the government of Mexico can't get its act together and seems to stumble over dragging tongues and, in the case of the Mexican president, a fantasy about GMO food, in this case, corn. For example, without any legitimate scientific proof that GMO corn is inherently unhealthy or that extensive consumption in Mexico by Mexicans will corrupt the original corn developed by Mexican Indians thousands of years ago in the Valley of Mexico. President Andres Manuel López Obrador has banned the importation of genetically modified corn from the U.S. in 2024. If we were talking about a truckload of corn, that would be one thing, but American farmers sell thousands of metric tons of genetically modified corn to Mexico for cattle feed, yes, but more importantly, for low-price consumption by millions of Mexicans. Millions upon millions of dollars are involved. The details are clearly negative for American farmers. The López Obrador decree doesn't define the ban as on corn for human consumption or animal feed. In other words, all genetically modified corn is involved. American farmers object because there is no proof that modified corn will force Mexican pure corn off the market or diminish it in any way, or if humans are at risk if they eat modified corn. The dollars involved, billions, spelled with a B. The effects of the ban will be to raise prices in Mexico for the poor, cut American farm income by billions, and cause the poor of Mexico, the national poverty percentage of which has grown by over 25% under López Obrador, the poor of Mexico will increase and suffer immeasurably. The other complaint leveled at President López Obrador by opposition Mexicans, American and Canadian investors in Mexico, as well as large investors from Spain, is that López Obrador is attempting to return Mexico's electrical production back, its energy production, back into the hands of the government, to the Comisión Federal de Electricidad, the CFE, which charges Mexicans 10 times more or more for electricity than what privately generated electricity costs the government or large industrial firms that buy directly from private facilities. The foreign energy investors are complaining because López Obrador has not allowed a single private facility to open new facilities since he became president 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago. Moreover, he's trying to charge private firms to make the CFA, a company that loses money hand over fist, a government company. He wants to turn them into something other than just another losing government company. By restricting private energy and decreeing the banishment of genetically modified corn from the U.S., many charge President López Obrador has violated the terms of the U.S., Mexican, and Canadian Free Trade Agreement that López Obrador approved and signed as President of Mexico. American trade officials have been talking with the Mexicans, but it appears that a stubborn López Obrador, who thinks he is the one-man ruler of Mexico, will not bend and will drag Mexico into trade court where he will lose and cost Mexico billions in fines and trade and thousands of jobs. Moreover, the president's 4 years in office have raised poverty level from less than 40% to well over 50% of the total population of Mexico. All the gains Mexico made under Presidents Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderón against the extreme and normal everyday poverty are being flushed out of the system by López Obrador. I must state this. President Biden and Canada's leader, Trudeau, met with President López Obrador the other day in Mexico City, and none of these issues were discussed because the Mexicans insisted they not be discussed, nor were issues of free speech, unlawful detentions of opposition politicos, and strangling police states that López Obrador supports in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Let's take a break, and when we return, we'll take a look at war on the old Silk Route that Marco Polo walked on 900 years ago. That same walk that I took 6 years ago. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Raul Contreras, and this is the first Contreras Report of 2023, the last segment of the first report of 2023. Those of you who have watched the Contreras Report in the 2 years we've been on air know that besides my interest in American and Mexican political and economic events, I also have an interest in the Middle East. I developed that interest in the 1960s because I was in the Marine Corps then, and I felt America and its Marine Corps would be involved there in what I thought would be World War III. Wars in the Middle East and adjoining countries have occurred almost daily with some frequency since then. Not all have been between Arabs and Israel. The U.S. has been involved there on the ground since 1990. My Marines were involved beyond anything I ever imagined, fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan for 20 years. The war I became involved with was as a journalist, observer, and writer. that being the 3 decades-long war between Armenia and next-door Azerbaijan. Christian Armenia versus Muslim Azerbaijan. In 2015, I ran into a New York Times article entitled "The Frozen Conflict." I thought it was about the infamous days-long battle my Marine drill instructors fought in Korea in 1950 at the Chosin Reservoir in Korea, what Marines called the Frozen Chosen. The Marines, my Marines, destroyed several entire Chinese Communist Army divisions at Chosin Reservoir in a period of a week, despite being totally surrounded by well over 100,000 Chinese troops. 100,000 Chinese troops, 17,000 Marines. The Frozen Conflict article turned out to be a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan over an Azerbaijan territory named Nagorno-Karabakh. The Karabakh was home to some Armenians who declared secession from Azerbaijan after expelling Azerbaijanis from Armenia and the Karabakh territory starting in 1987. Both countries left the Soviet Union in 1990-91, and war broke out, started by the Armenians who wanted the valuable Karabakh territory. The countries fought for 2 years, the Armenians with Soviet army troops fighting alongside them, side by side, fought valiantly and victoriously against the Azerbaijanis, who didn't have the military experience that the Armenians had before the breakup of the Soviet Union. A war crime by Armenians came to my attention, and that took me to Azerbaijan, where I spoke to many people who had been expelled from Armenia and survivors of the massacre at an Azerbaijani town called Khojaly, Khojaly. Khojaly was a massacre where over 600 unarmed men, women, and children were slaughtered, and 1,000 more missing who have never been accounted for by the marauding Armenians, the irregulars, by the way, wasn't an organized army, and an organized Russian infantry unit of motorized infantry on the fateful night of February 26, 1992. The Armenians didn't stop in Khojaly. They fought for and conquered 20% more of Azerbaijani territory before a ceasefire was negotiated between the two combatant countries. The ceasefire lasted until a brief firefight was fought in 2016, then in 2020. A full state of war began, which was ended by a negotiated ceasefire organized with Russian help. In a single word, victory, Azerbaijan won this chapter of the years-long war and was able to recapture much of the territory lost in 1994 that had been occupied illegally by Armenia for 25 years. The Azerbaijani army proved its superior training in weaponry and ability to wage modern war by defeating Armenia in a victorious battle that lasted just 44 days. Armenia is basically a bankrupt nation, owing its very existence to its ally Russia. Foreign money from Moscow, France, and Los Angeles, sent by individual Armenians scattered around the world, is the only financing keeping Armenia alive. Over a third of its national budget comes from money sent from the Armenian diaspora around the world. A third of their budget. Armenia's population is shrinking, and many observers suggest that Armenia as a country will cease to exist within a generation or two. I wrote a book, Murder in the Mountains, about the Khojaly massacre. That book and the research into that war made me a more than casual observer of the area and the conflict. As of today, defeated Armenia and its friends in what is left of the Azerbaijani territory Armenia illegally occupied for over 25 years are complaining, that's a polite way of saying whining, that the one road left between the Karabach's few remaining Armenians plus some foreign-born Armenians from Syria and Armenia proper has been closed for some weeks by Azerbaijani citizens who are protesting illegal mining on Azerbaijani territory by the defeated Armenians. They are also protesting fleeing Armenians who, as they leave to go back to Armenia, are setting fire to the houses that they stole from Azerbaijanis that they ran out of the country a quarter century ago. And they're setting fire to these residences, so the Azerbaijanis will find nothing but ashes when they come back. And forests. The Karabakh is heavily forested, and that's very valuable. And what are the Armenians that are leaving to go back to Armenia doing? They're burning forests down. They're setting fires in the extensive forests that cover the Karabakh. These protesters on the road are not Azerbaijani soldiers. The only troops on the Lachen road from Karabakh to Armenia are Russians. Nonetheless, the international Armenian propaganda machine is crying and whining that Armenians left in the Karabakh are going through a, quote, humanitarian crisis and have no food or medicine because the Lachen road is closed. But of course, it is not closed. Red Cross trucks bearing medical and food, medical equipment and food, Russian trucks bearing whatever the Russians are carrying, and other non-commercial vehicles drive the road every day, every single day. Most importantly, it's the Russians controlling the road. Not a single Azerbaijani soldier is in sight. One wonders when, if ever, the Armenian propaganda machine will stop lying. It has spent decades lying and preaching to the Christian West that this is an attack on Christianity by Muslims, but that is a blatant lie. It has been my pleasure to have spent hours touring Christian, Orthodox, and Roman Catholic churches in Azerbaijan, plus Jewish synagogues and Sunni and Shia Muslim mosques. I can't say the same about Armenia. In the 80s and early 90s, Armenia expelled 250,000 Azerbaijanis from Armenia. Then they expelled 700,000 Azerbaijanis from their homes in Azerbaijan. They destroyed every Muslim mosque except one. The one Iran maintains in the Armenian capital for its embassy employees to worship in. In 1960, Armenia had 10,000 Jews, people of the Jewish faith. Today, there are an estimated 300 Jews left in Armenia. I firmly believe that the United States Congress should cut off all aid to Armenia, cash aid, and any other kind of aid. The U.S. shouldn't support any country that invades and conquers more than 20% of a neighbor's country and holds onto it illegally for over 25 years. Nor should it subsidize a criminal country like Armenia that provided soldiers to Nazi Germany in World War II, or expelled 1 million people from their homes in Armenia and from their own country of Azerbaijan. Cut off Armenia's aid, Congress. That is today's program. Before we sign off, our email address will appear on screen in a moment. Use it to ask questions or make comments. If you like this program, tell your friends so they can subscribe if they are on YouTube, or add our channel to their Roku channels. Soon we'll be on Apple Plus as well. Thanks. We'll see you next time.